There is a moment in every man's life when he stops performing strength and starts living it. When the armor he has worn so long it feels like skin finally becomes too heavy to carry, and he has to choose, put it down or be buried under it. Kwon Kang had been wearing his armor since he was 14 years old. He had thought it was permanent. He had thought it was him. And then a 5-year-old girl with 2 messy hair puffs and a plastic cup had looked at him and seen straight through every single layer of it, all the way down to the man underneath who was desperately, quietly, achingly lonely, and called him by his name. He got out of the car. Sung Min moved to follow and Kang held up one hand without looking back. "Stay here," he said. And then he walked into the building that housed Park Do-hyun's private offices, alone, with the kind of calm that is not the absence of emotion, but the complete, total mastery of it. He had called ahead. Of course he had called ahead. Kwon Kang did not ambush. He announced himself and made the other person wait in the knowledge of his arrival, because the waiting was always worse than the meeting. Park Do-hyun's assistant met him in the marble lobby with sweating hands and led him up in silence. The old man was standing when Kang entered. That was the first thing. Park Do-hyun always sat when subordinates entered. He stood for equals and stood differently for threats. He was standing the second way now. "Kang-ah," he said, using the familiar form, the form that implied closeness, history, affection, the form that tonight rang completely hollow. "Sit down. Let's talk like reasonable men." "I'll stand," Kang said pleasantly. "This won't take long." He set a single USB drive on the desk between them and watched the old man's eyes drop to it and then come back up very carefully. "What is that?" Park Do-hyun asked. "A copy," Kang said. "The original is already somewhere you cannot reach." He paused. "You had a journalist put a story about Michelle in 3 publications this morning. You used Han Seo-yeon to try and frighten her 2 weeks ago. And before any of that, you have been quietly moving board proxies to build a majority position that would allow you to call an emergency shareholders meeting and remove me as chairman." He tilted his head slightly. "Did I miss anything?" The old man's expression did something complicated, a calculation happening behind his eyes. "You're letting emotions compromise your judgment," Park Do-hyun said carefully. "This woman, her name is Michelle. This situation is creating exposure for the group. The press attention, the questions about your personal life. These things have consequences for all of us. I was protecting the business." Kang looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "You were protecting your leverage. There is a difference." He pulled out a chair and sat down after all, folding himself into it with complete ease, and suddenly Park Do-hyun was the one standing, which was a reversal the old man clearly felt. "The drive contains documentation of every proxy arrangement you have made in the past 6 years that violates the shareholder agreement my father signed. It also contains records of 3 transactions in 2019 that were not disclosed to the board. Any one of them would be enough. All 3 together would be something significantly worse than embarrassing." The silence in the room had weight. "You've been building that file for years," Park Do-hyun said slowly. The calculation in his eyes had shifted to something closer to respect, the reluctant kind. "I've been building it since I was 27, Kang said. "When I first began to suspect that my father's heart attack was not entirely natural." He let that land. He watched it land. "I wasn't ready to use it then. I am ready now." Another pause, careful and deliberate. The story about Michelle disappears from every platform by tonight. You retract your proxy arrangements and restore the board composition to its original structure within 10 business days. And you never contact her, or go near her, or involve yourself in my personal life in any capacity again. Park Do-hyun's jaw was tight. And if I don't? Kang smiled. It was not a warm smile. Then I stop being reasonable. He stood up, smoothed his coat. I have been very patient with you, Do-hyun-shi. I respected your relationship with my father. I gave you time and space and far more latitude than you deserved. That consideration is over now. He walked toward the door and then stopped, his hand resting on the frame. Oh, and the article about my father's death. The one that was buried in 2009. I found it. I know who paid to have it buried. I know what it would mean if it surfaced now. He looked back over his shoulder. Consider that a receipt, not a threat, just so we understand each other completely. He left, in the elevator going down, alone. He let out one slow breath. His hands were completely steady. That was how he had been trained. That was the armor doing its job. But underneath the steadiness, his heart was hammering. Because this was the most dangerous move he had made in his professional life. And the reason he had made it was a woman in a third-floor walk-up in Mapo-gu who had looked him in the eyes and said, with all her considerable pride fully intact, "I will pay you back whatever you spent." He wanted to protect her. He wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him every time he examined it. He got back in the car and told Song-min to drive to Mapo. She was awake when he got there. He knew she would be. He had learned that Michelle Okafor did not sleep when she was carrying something. She processed, she sat, she thought. And when she had turned something over enough times to understand its shape, only then would she rest. She opened the door before he knocked. She had heard the elevator, the working elevator apparently, because tonight of all nights, the building's ancient machinery had chosen to function. And she was standing in the doorway in a loose sweater and her reading glasses pushed up on her head. And when she saw his face, she stepped back without a word and let him in. Mirabelle was asleep. The apartment was quiet. She poured 2 cups of tea without asking, and they sat at the small kitchen table across from each other, and Kang told her everything. Not the curated version, not the protective version where he softened the edges to spare her. All of it. Park Do-hyun, the proxy arrangements, what he suspected about his father, the file he had been building for 11 years, what he had done tonight. She listened without interrupting. This was one of the things about her that undid him regularly. She actually listened. Not waiting for her turn to speak, not preparing her response. Actually listening, taking it in, processing it in real time with those dark eyes that missed nothing. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. "Your father," she said. "You think Park Do-hyun had something to do with what happened to him?" "I think my father found out what Do-hyun was doing with the company finances and confronted him privately. I think my father was the kind of man who believed in handling things quietly and honorably. I think Do-hyun understood that about him and used it." He paused. "I can't prove it. Not yet. But the article that was buried, it raised questions about the circumstances. Questions that were answered very quickly and very cleanly by people connected to Do-hyun." Michelle was quiet for a moment. "Kang, this man, if he did what you think he did to your father, He's not going to just accept what happened tonight and walk away. Filing the board documents, yes. The press articles, yes. But the larger thing... I know, he said. I know he won't. Then what you did tonight... She leaned forward slightly. You declared war. He met her eyes. I declared war the moment I got in that car with Mirabel. I just didn't know it yet. A pause. I need you to understand that the situation may become more difficult before it becomes easier. I need you to know that with complete honesty, because you deserve honesty, and you deserve to make your own decisions with full information. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it that she was learning to hear. The frequency of someone who is afraid not for themselves, but for someone else. If you want to step back from this, Quan Kang, she said, and something in her tone made him stop. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the table. She looked at him with the directness that was fundamentally, essentially her. I have been stepping back my entire life. From things that scared me. From people who told me the road was too hard. From situations where I was the only one who would lose if it went wrong. She folded her hands on the table. I am tired of stepping back. You asked me to trust you. She paused. So trust me back. He stared at her. Something in his chest did something architectural. A wall not breaking exactly, but becoming a window. Okay, he said. It was barely above a whisper. Good. She picked up her tea. Now tell me about your father. Not the business parts. Tell me about him as a man. He had not spoken about his father to anyone in years. He had not spoken about him as a man, not as a chairman, not as a figure, but as a person, perhaps ever. He looked at this woman across a small kitchen table in a small apartment in Mapo-gu, and he opened his mouth, and he spoke. He talked for almost an hour. His father's laugh, the way he had smelled like a specific cedar and leather combination that Kang could still conjure without effort. The fishing trips that his father had called mandatory and his young self had called torture, and that he would give absolutely anything now to have one more of. The advice his father had given him at 17, that he had been too arrogant to hear, and spent his 30s finally understanding. Michelle listened. When he paused, she asked questions. Not probing ones, not therapeutic ones, human ones. What did he look like? Was he funny? Did he know how to cook? Did he love your mother? He loved my mother the way people love things they know they can lose, Kang said. Very completely and very carefully. Michelle was quiet for a moment. That's beautiful, she said. And sad. Most beautiful things are, he said, and he was looking at her when he said it, and they both understood that he was not talking about his father anymore. If this story is moving you the way it's moving us, please hit the like button right now and subscribe, because what happens next is going to shake you to your core. The next morning, the articles were gone. Not archived, not updated with corrections. Gone. Removed completely, as if they had never existed. Chisholm texted Michelle 17 separate messages about it, with increasing levels of astonishment. Blessing called and said something in Igbo that Michelle chose not to translate for present company. But the removal of the articles was only the first thing that happened. The second thing happened at Mirabel's school. Michelle got a call at 11 in the morning from the school administrator, her voice very carefully neutral in the way that meant something was happening that required neutrality. Ms. Okafor, there is a situation at the school involving Mirabel that we'd like you to come in for. Mirabelle is completely fine and safe, she added quickly. But we feel this should be handled with a parent present. Michelle was there in 20 minutes. Kang, who she had called without entirely planning to, arrived 4 minutes after her, which meant he had broken several traffic laws, and Sung Min had not objected. In the administrator's office, a small but dramatically serious situation had unfolded. A boy in Mirabelle's class, the son of a relatively prominent Seoul family, 7 years old and already fluent in the language of inherited entitlement, had told Mirabelle that morning that she didn't belong in Korea, that her mother was in the news for bad things, and that she should go back to Africa. Mirabelle had listened to this with great patience. Then she had stood up from her seat, walked over to the boy, looked him directly in the eye, and said in flawless Korean, "My mother is the strongest person I know, and the news is wrong, and my father is going to come fix it." The class had gone extremely quiet at the words, "my father." The boy had said, "You don't have a father." Mirabelle had considered this for a moment, and then said very calmly, "I will soon," and walked back to her seat. The administrator read this account from her notes with the neutral tone of someone trying very hard not to show that she found it remarkable. Michelle sat in the chair across from the desk, with her hand pressed over her mouth. Kang sat beside her in absolute stillness. When the administrator finished, Michelle said carefully, "I'll speak to Mirabelle about the appropriate way to—" "May I?" Kang said quietly. Both women looked at him. "May I speak to her?" he said. "If that's appropriate. If that's acceptable." The administrator looked at Michelle. Michelle looked at Kang for a long moment, with an expression that had too many things in it to name all at once. "Yes," she said. Mirabelle was brought in. She walked in with her backpack and her chin up, and the expression of someone who does not regret their choices. She saw her mother and nodded seriously. She saw Kang, and her entire face changed. The way faces change when you see someone you did not know you were hoping for. "I didn't get in trouble," she told him immediately. "I didn't push him or say a bad word. I only used my words." "I know," he said. "Come here." She came to him. He crouched down. She stood in front of him with her serious 5-year-old dignity fully assembled. "You said I was going to come fix it," he said. She met his eyes. "You did, though. The things on the internet are gone. Mummy's friend Chisholm told her." He stared at her. This child. This extraordinary, terrifying, perfect child. "How do you even know about that?" "I hear things," said Mirabelle, with the serenity of a sage. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had that first night on the sidewalk, and he felt the question she had asked him then reverberating through everything that had happened since. "Do you want me?" "Mirabelle," he said, "I need to tell you something important." She waited, very still, very serious. "I am going to take care of you and your mother. I am going to make sure that nobody says things like what that boy said to you today without consequence. And I am going to be here." He paused. "For a long time. If that's acceptable to you." Mirabelle considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court judge. "Are you going to be my baba?" she asked. The word, baba, the Yoruba word for father, sitting in her mouth so naturally, said so simply, landed in the center of his chest like a key in a lock. He heard Michelle make a sound behind him, a small, sharp, involuntary sound. "If your mother agrees," he said carefully, "then yes, that is what I would like to be." Mirabelle looked past him at her mother. Michelle was sitting in the chair with her hands clasped in her lap, and her eyes very bright, and her expression showing a woman who has spent a very long time being strong alone, and is in the process of learning, terrifyingly and wonderfully, that she doesn't have to be. "Mummy," said Mirabelle. "Come here, baby," Michelle managed. Mirabelle went to her mother. Michelle held her for a moment with her face pressed to the top of Mirabelle's hair. Then she looked up at Kang, still crouched in the middle of the administrator's office, in his expensive suit, on the floor for the second time in their acquaintance, and she said with a voice that was steady, but just barely, "We'll talk. At home. Tonight." He nodded. He stood up. He thanked the administrator. He walked out of the school into the bright Seoul morning and stood on the pavement and tipped his head back and looked at the sky. Sung-min, who had been waiting by the car, watched his employer standing there and wisely said absolutely nothing. The evening came with all the weight of something important. Mirabelle had been bathed and fed and tucked in with her rabbit and told 3 stories, one by Michelle, one by Kang at Mirabelle's specific request, which had been about a general who learned that the most powerful thing he ever commanded was not an army, but a family, and which Michelle had listened to from the doorway with her arms crossed and her heart wide open. When Mirabelle was asleep, they sat on the small sofa together. Not at opposite ends this time. Close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of the city coming through the thin walls. Seoul, alive and enormous and indifferent, going about its business outside, while inside this small, warm room, something enormous was quietly happening. "I need to ask you something," Michelle said. "And I need you to answer me honestly. Not carefully, not politically. Honestly." "Yes," he said. "Do you love me? Or do you love the idea of what we are?" She kept her eyes forward. "Because I am not a project. I'm not something to rescue, and I'm not a feeling you're having because your life was empty and we filled it. I need to know the difference, Kang, because if I open this door..." She stopped, started again. "If I open this door all the way and let you in, you and I both know there is no version of this where I can close it again. Not me. I'm not built that way. So I need to know." The room was very still. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about what she had asked with the seriousness it deserved. Really thought, instead of reaching for the smooth, prepared response. When he spoke, his voice was low and unhurried. 3 years ago, he said, I sat in a meeting with 8 people and made a decision that changed the financial trajectory of 4,000 employees, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not stress, nothing. I went home to a house with 14 rooms, and I sat in one of them, and I ate dinner alone, and watched the news, and went to sleep. And that was a completely typical day. He paused. "And then your daughter grabbed my coat on a sidewalk, and I sat on a hospital floor holding a plastic cup, and you argued with me about a car I had already sent, and I stood in front of a wall of drawings and felt something I had forgotten was possible." Another pause. "I don't love an idea. I have spent my entire adult life surrounded by ideas, and they have never once made me sit on a floor or break 11 years of professional strategy in a single evening, or eat a slightly crushed granola bar from a 5-year-old's lunchbox without asking what was in it." He turned to look at her finally. "I love you. Specifically, inconveniently, completely. You, Michelle. The arguments and the pride and the 4-syllable name and the way you make tea when something is serious, and the face you make when Mirabelle says something that breaks you open. That is what I love." She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were very bright. "The granola bar had raisins in it," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "You don't like raisins. I saw your face." "I ate every single one," he said. She laughed, the same laugh that had stopped him at the restaurant, full and unguarded and real. And then she stopped laughing and looked at him, and the air between them changed into something that had been building for months. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, Kwon Kan." He reached out and took her hand. Just that, her hand in his. No grand gesture, just contact, steady and warm and intentional. She turned her hand over and held his back. But peace, in this story, was never going to come without a final price. And that price arrived precisely 1 week later. It came in the form of a woman Kang had not expected. His mother. Kwon Mi-rae had been living in Jeju since her husband's death. She had retreated from Seoul and its memories and its politics with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has survived everything and knows the cost of everything. She was 63, elegant, precise, and formidable in the way that women are formidable when they have outlasted every person who underestimated them. She arrived at Kang's Seoul residence unannounced, which she had never done in 12 years. She sat in his living room on a chair she chose with the deliberateness of someone placing a flag. And when Kang came home that evening to find her there, he understood immediately that Do-hyun's retreat had not been total, that the old man had made one final move before folding his hand, and that move had been to call Kwon Mi-rae and tell her things designed to be maximally destabilizing. His mother looked at him and said, "Tell me about this woman." He told her. He told her everything, the way he had told Michelle everything, completely. His mother listened with the stillness of someone who has learned to separate information from reaction. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Park Do-hyun called me," she said. "He told me a version of this that was designed to make me afraid." "I know." "He mentioned things about your father." Her voice was absolutely controlled. "Things about the night he died. Things he said he had proof of and would release unless..." "Unless what?" Kang's voice had gone very still. His mother looked at her son. "Unless you ended the relationship with the Nigerian woman and returned the board to its previous arrangement." A pause. "He gave me a week to convince you." The room was completely quiet. "He doesn't have proof," Kang said. "He has leverage. There's a difference. Whatever he told you, Kang Ah..." His mother said his name the way she had said it when he was a boy, the way that stopped everything. "I know he doesn't have proof. I know what happened that night." Her chin was steady. Her eyes were steady. "Because I was there." There are moments in a story that change everything that came before them, that make you reassemble every scene from the beginning with new understanding. This was one of those moments. Kwon Mi-rae had been in the building the night her husband died. Not in the room, she hadn't known what was happening in the room. But she had come to bring him something he'd forgotten, something small and domestic and completely out of place in the narrative of what happened after. And she had seen Park Do-hyun leaving. She had seen the expression on the old man's face. She had said nothing for 12 years because she had a son, and because she had been afraid, and because she had no proof, only the terrifying certainty of instinct. She had been carrying it alone since he was 26 years old. Kang sat across from his mother in his own living room and felt 12 years of his life realign themselves. He felt the weight of what she had carried redistribute itself, some of it passing to him, but also, in its passing, becoming lighter for them both. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice was very quiet. "Because you would have done something," she said simply. "Immediately, without enough preparation. You were 26 and you were furious and grieving, and you would have gone at him the same night, and he would have destroyed you." She paused. "So I waited. I waited for you to become someone he couldn't destroy." Another pause, so delicate. "It took a Nigerian woman and her daughter for you to become that person. I want you to understand that I am fully aware of the irony." He stared at his mother, and then, unexpectedly, Kwon Mire smiled. A small, real smile, the one she gave when something genuinely surprised her. "I would like to meet her," she said, "properly. And the child." A pause. "Do-hyun told me about the child. He meant it as a complication. He has never understood that children are not complications. They are the point." If this story is living in your chest the way it's living in ours, please subscribe and share it. Someone who needs this story is waiting for it. They met on a Sunday. Michelle wore a deep rust-coloured dress that Chisom had chosen and Blessing had approved, and Mirabelle had called very pretty, with the authority of someone whose opinion is final. Kwon Mire arrived with flowers, not the grand arranged kind, simple garden flowers. And when Michelle opened the door and they looked at each other for the first time, something quiet and mutual and entirely between women passed between them.
"Your home is warm," Mire said, stepping inside and looking at the wall of drawings. "Thank you," Michelle said carefully. Mire stopped in front of Mirabelle's drawings. She read each one slowly. She stopped at the newest edition, the one Mirabelle had put up 2 days ago, a drawing of 4 figures labelled in her serious crooked letters. Mommy, Baba, Kang, Halmoni, and Mirabelle, the brave one. Mire stood in front of it for a very long time. Her shoulders moved once. When she turned around, her eyes were bright. "She called me Halmoni," she said. The Korean word for grandmother, with a question mark. She wasn't sure if it was too forward, Michelle said. "Where is she?" Mire asked. Mirabelle appeared from the hallway as if she had been waiting for exactly this cue, which she absolutely had been, because she had been standing behind the door for 3 minutes. She came forward with her hands clasped in front of her and looked up at Kwon Mire with the full assessment power of those round, serious eyes. Mire crouched down. Mirabelle said very carefully in Korean, "Are you Baba's mother?" "Yes," said Mire. Mirabelle considered this. "He looks like you, around the eyes." Mire laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "He does," she agreed. "Can I call you Halmoni?" Mirabelle asked. Mire reached out and gently fixed one of Mirabelle's coming undone hair puffs with the automatic tenderness of a woman who has been waiting a very long time for a grandchild. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." Michelle, watching from the kitchen doorway, pressed both hands over her face. Kang appeared beside her. He stood close without touching, letting her have the moment. "You're shaking," he said softly. "I'm not," she whispered, muffled behind her hands, shaking. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him, not dramatically, just the quiet lean of someone who is finally letting someone else hold some of the weight. She put a question mark, Michelle said from behind her hands. She wasn't sure if it was allowed. "Everything is allowed," he said. "Everything." Park Do-hyun resigned from the board 17 days later, citing health reasons. 3 of his proxies followed. The documentation Kang held was enough to ensure the resignation was quiet. No public exposure, no scandal, but also no ambiguity about what had been surrendered. Kwon Mire, after a conversation with her son that lasted 4 hours
and covered 12 years of held information, agreed to give a formal witness statement to a private investigator, the beginning of what would eventually become a much longer reckoning with what had happened to her husband. That reckoning was still ahead of them, but it had been started. The door had been opened. Hans Soyon, for her part, simply disappeared back into her world. She was a clever enough woman to recognize when a campaign had failed, and she was proud enough not to continue one she couldn't win. The broken elevator in Michelle's building was fixed. Kang arranged it anonymously. The building manager told every resident it had been an anonymous donation. Michelle found out it was him 3 weeks later and called him and said, "The elevator?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. "Kwon Kang." The building was a safety hazard. "You are so practical," he suggested. "Impossible," she finished, and he could hear her smiling, and he stood in his large glass office surrounded by the Seoul skyline and felt something he had given up on feeling in this building. Happy. Specifically, quietly, solidly happy. Mirabelle started calling him Baba consistently about a month later. Not as a question, as a fact. The way she called her mother Mommy, matter-of-factly, fully, with total certainty. He was sitting beside her on the floor working on a drawing when she said it the first time, without the question mark, without ceremony, just, "Baba, can you pass the blue?" He passed the blue. His hand was completely steady. The evening that marked the true ending of this chapter, and the beginning of whatever was coming next, was ordinary in the way that the most important moments always are. Kang was at the apartment for dinner. Michelle was cooking. The real kind, the Nigerian kind, the kind that filled the small apartment with smells that were warm and complex and entirely themselves. Mireille had come because she came most Sundays now, and she was at the table teaching Mirabelle a Korean card game with great seriousness. The sound of Mirabelle's shrieks of outrage when she lost filled the apartment in waves. Kang was leaning in the kitchen doorway, watching Michelle cook. She turned and caught him watching and said, "What?" "Nothing," he said. "You're staring." "I'm looking," he said. "There's a difference." She pointed her cooking spoon at him. "Help or move?" He moved into the kitchen and stood beside her, and she handed him something to stir without looking, and they stood close in the small, warm kitchen while his mother and his daughter, the thought still unlocked something in him every time, laughed loudly over a card game in the next room. "Kang," she said, stirring her pot. Are you happy?" He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was feeling the full weight of it, the realness of it, the unexpected, unplanned, inconvenient, perfect realness of standing in a small kitchen in Mapogu with a woman he loved who smelled like her cooking and her perfume and herself. "Yes," he said. "Are you?" She was quiet for her own moment. Then she reached over without looking and found his hand with hers, briefly, warmly, solidly, and then went back to stirring. "Yes," she said. From the next room, Mirabelle announced at maximum volume that Haumoni was cheating, and Mireille denied it with great dignity, and Michelle laughed, and Kang looked at all of it, the small table and the noisy child, and his mother's rare, genuine laughter, and this woman at the stove, and thought of the cold sidewalk and the small hand on his sleeve, and the question that had changed everything. "Do you want me?" "Yes," he thought, "with everything I am. Yes." But not everything was settled. Not yet. Because what Kang still didn't know, what was waiting quietly in a file that Mireille hadn't yet shown him, in evidence she had kept for 12 years that went further than anyone had imagined,
was the name of the second person involved in what happened to his father. Not Do-hyun alone. Someone else. Someone still inside the Kwon group. Someone who had been watching Kang build his empire and waiting, very patiently, for exactly the right moment. That moment was coming, and this time, the threat wouldn't come for Kang. It would come for Michelle. That's where we have to leave you today, right at the edge of everything. And if this story has taken up residence in your heart, if you've felt every moment of it, please like this video and subscribe right now so you are the first to know when part 3 arrives. Share this with someone who deserves a love story this powerful, because the best part, loves, the most dramatic, the most emotional, the most beautiful part of this story is still ahead. We'll see you very soon.